For a long time, that kind of make do attitude has been championed. Like, oh, look what we've been able to accomplish. Look what these H2F teams have been able to do with so little. Like, look at the impact they're having. To rise to the level of a true medical clinic requires like a massive overhaul in the infrastructure of where you're operating. Welcome back to another week of Mops and Memos here with Drew and Alex. Thinking about making Alex a full-time co-host instead of just a frequent guest. So this is somewhat of a trial episode. But before we kick off, talk to me.
I don't know if this is a correction or a clarification on something we insinuated on the previous episode. This is really my fault. Yeah, on submarines. This is a little bit my fault for not adding the correct attribution in the intro of the episode for how we found our guest. Some very important listeners, possibly the most important listeners, and I'm specifically talking about the Peacocks here, my girlfriend's parents, probably number one fans of the podcast, pointed out that we kept calling it Drew's side quest to like get into these niche human performance corners, which implied that Drew found us our expert submarine guest, and that is not the case. I have to credit where credit is due. It was, in fact, the Peacocks who got us our initial lead. Really? We went back and forth with the submariner they found. He said he wasn't necessarily the right guy to talk on the episode, and he found us Commander Spears. So shout out to our number one fans, Craig and Carrie. Thank you for getting us our guest for the submarine episode.
I didn't realize that they got the initial hook.
Uh-huh.
Huh. Look at that. Do you have a preferred sparkling water?
What's
no free ads, but you're going to see my Spindrift. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, we have Spindrifts in the fridge in the garage. I'm not a huge sparkling water guy, but those ice ones that are in all the grocery stores, taller, skinnier bottles.
Those give me heartburn.
I don't know. I like those.
Spindrift,
but again, I'm not a huge sparkling water guy.
Spindrift, first of all, that's not sparkling water, but that tells a lot.
I mean, it's sparkling and water.
This is the only one that I know of that actually uses real fruit.
How much flavor does there have to be before it stops being sparkling water and starts to be like an actual beverage?
That's a good question. Like,
that's like the classic LaCroix
when does it
meme,
become
right?
A soda?
Like manufactured in a facility that also processes strawberries.
When do you...
A memory of lime.
When does a sparkling water... I'm like Jamie on Rogan.
This is the same as our cairn versus pyramid conversation. There is not going to be an objective one.
Okay. It becomes a soda when sweeteners and flavorings are added.
There's flavoring in your sparkling water.
See, now, and I would grant you that. I would say, however, Spindrift uses like real fruit.
Okay.
So I would say Spindrift is a purist's sparkling water. But if you get into the LaCroix, the ones using the natural flavors, quote unquote, that are really just artificial flavors, that's maybe.
Does it use real fruit or does it use real fruit flavors?
Spindrift uses fruit puree, real fruit. No free ads, but hey, drink Spindrift. That's like when does a muffin become a cupcake? Can you have a cupcake without icing? And if so, is that a muffin?
Oof, man, I don't know.
These are big questions.
The most important philosophical questions.
If you had a cupcake and you dropped it and the icing fell off, does it become a muffin? Is a muffin just a naked cupcake?
If you had a muffin and you dropped it into icing,
do you know the muffin?
Would it become a cupcake?
If you have a glazed blueberry muffin, is it a cupcake? When does a muffin become a cupcake?
We are way off track now.
Okay, see, a muffin becomes a cupcake when frosting is added to the top. If you have I have had blueberry muffins that have glaze. Are they cupcakes? What did we start talking about when we first opened up? Emily's parents?
Yep.
Man, guys, we're here today to talk about athletic trainers, medical oversight of H2F, memos that have come out, very strict business stuff, but I'm also going to try and figure out this blueberry cupcake muffin thing. Walk us into this one, please.
Sure. We have covered the athletic trainer issue in previous episodes. We have talked about like where the line is between medical and human performance in previous episodes. And a couple of memos were published, I think last week, like within the last week, right? Pretty recent.
Last week.
That seemed worthy of discussion here.
Breaking news.
Notably, so there's two memos we're going to discuss. The first one we'll chat about is the credentialing policy for certified athletic trainers. And the second one we're going to talk about is the U.S. Army Medical Command responsibility for clinical quality management of holistic health and fitness program.
Really gripping stuff.
Well, we're going to try and explain the relevance and the meaning. I think this one may be more interesting and relevant for the practitioner side of our audience, perhaps, than the soldier side of our audience. But it is, even if you are just a soldier who's interested in fitness and performance, there might be some interesting lenses here into the like political, bureaucratic, legal, safety hoops that have to be jumped through to produce a embedded human performance program, because we're going to talk about some challenges. This one's going to be specific to the Army, but right off the top, we're going to mention that the Army basically copied a lot of stuff from the Navy on this one. So these are challenges that all of the services face.
And we did try and get John to come on and join us.
Yeah.
As our resident physical therapist.
Yeah, there probably should be a medical professional.
Yeah,
here.
We're highly unqualified to have this conversation. But
he's too busy being a dad, probably.
He's on paternity leave, so that's totally fair. Shall we give some background?
I mean, I think
like why are ATs in the news? You know,
I think a lot of this stems from the
drama.
The AT drama, the whole H2F teams that were established in 2024 and earlier have athletic trainers right now. Teams established in 2025 and going forward are not receiving athletic trainers as part of their teams. And for a brief period there, we thought all the athletic trainer jobs were going to be eliminated, which caused a lot of consternation and turmoil. And a lot of people left their jobs and found other ones before it actually went through. And then the change got kind of modified so that the jobs didn't go away, but the people are already gone. So that same kind of thing. Yeah, the drama.
And now they're doing somewhat of a comparative analysis between the athletically, I was going to say athletically trainer minded. No, that's not true. Between units that have athletic trainers and the units that will not as part of this next rollout. So,
I mean, I think if we're being honest, the whole doing a compare contrast thing was like a retcon, like an after the fact way to draw some value out of a crappy situation. But
yeah, because you take that, the math doesn't math if you think about it, because it's like, okay, we're either headed to a world where we're firing the athletic trainers, or we're heading to a world where we're firing strength coaches again, because we found that they aren't as effective as athletic trainers at doing athletic trainer things.
I mean, I can give you the answer to that one right now. I don't think strength coaches are as good as athletic trainers at doing athletic training things.
I'm feeling pretty comfortable making that the official position of Mops and Mo's. I think we could say with quite a bit of confidence, really, that strength coaches are probably the best strength coaches. Physical therapists are who you want for physical therapy. And then if you're looking for athletic training, you'd probably want to go with an athletic trainer.
Should we pause for a second? Because we can't assume that everybody who listens to this episode has already listened to our previous episodes.
That's what I meant when I said some background, and then we kind of did this little dance.
Should we explain what athletic trainers are, though?
Please. You want to?
Yeah, because I think among soldiers, among leaders at even the highest levels, I think there is a little bit of confusion about what the difference is between a strength coach and an athletic trainer. Because
the word trainer throws people off.
Yeah, the term athletic trainer sounds a lot like personal trainer. It gives the impression that it's somewhere between a strength coach and a personal trainer, something like that. And it's neither of those things. It's nothing like a personal trainer, and it's nothing like a strength coach. I will quote from the memo we're about to discuss, because I think that's a decent working definition of it. In the eyes of the United States Army's Medical Command, an athletic trainer is a non-privileged allied healthcare professional specializing in injury prevention and who provides evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment of acute musculoskeletal conditions at or near where soldiers train. And I think arguably the easiest way to understand it is when, if most of our audience is American, you're watching a football game, somebody gets hurt, somebody runs out there and does like the immediate assessment of how serious the injury is. That person is an athletic trainer.
Indeed. And then physical therapists kind of sit further down along the line of the rehabilitation pipeline.
Yeah.
As it were. But I would think in the kind of tactical setting that everybody here works in, that's a little bit fuzzier because you don't necessarily have the field of play, so to speak, with the AT doing the thing. You often do have
sometimes
an
you do
athletic
though.
trainer. That's true. But
like
I was thinking
a lot
of
of ATs have been doing like drop zone medical coverage for airborne units, and
that is true.
Like
but I've also seen
exercises.
Like the PTs going out and doing that too.
True.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that having been in the sports space and the tactical space, it's not as cut and dry on our side of things. So I get, sure. I guess I should say I get the confusion. I get the confusion between AT and PT. Hearing people talk about how ATs and strength coaches are the same thing is mildly infuriating because it's just like, dude, read one Google search and you'll figure that out. So anyway.
I think one last note before we dive into the actual contents of the first memo. I haven't seen anything that indicates that this solves the whole AT problem in terms of ATs in the upcoming, forthcoming 25 and beyond H2F programs, but it seems like a step in that direction.
Yeah. Do you think these would have come out if the drama hadn't happened?
Ooh.
For folks that don't know, we did do an episode on this, but regardless, some months ago, there was some, what should we call this? DHA, which is Defense Health Agency. There was some friction because the athletic trainer was just a non-existent entity in that system. And so the solution, which was the memo that was pushed out by General Mingus?
Correct, Vice Chief.
Yes, Vice Chief, was that we were going to get rid of the ATs. The language was not that blunt, but basically that was the gist. And they were going to be...
I should quote a little tiny piece of the language. I'm not going to get this word for word, but in that leaked email, he specifically said that the reason we were giving up athletic trainers is so that the Army could retain control of the H2F program, implying that there was a threat of DHA taking over.
Which again is interesting because the ATs aren't the only medical entity in H2F. So it's like, well, how are they going to go for one and not the other? What does this mean for so these were questions that were being asked at the time that we weren't really getting answers to.
They are notably the only contracted medical entity on the team. And I believe from my reading of the tea leaves, it feels like a lot of this comes back to a fight over who has the legal authority to contract for medical services.
Yes. So there was some, we have not had the opportunity to speak directly to a DHA person on the podcast, but
I have slung an email at their PAO org box, but I did not get anything back.
Yeah. But there was some, I guess what I was hearing at my level was that they just didn't, they had these far-flung clinics, which were H2F teams, and they didn't have any oversight over those things. And that kind of freaked out DHA in some sense. So long circuitous story, getting back to just that question of, I wonder if these memos, because I think there's goodness in these two memos, which we'll talk about, but would this action have been inspired had not there been some massive uproar of we need change when the ATs were allegedly going away? I don't know. But here we are. Where do you want to start?
First, just for, I think, a little bit of credit where it's due, we recently had an episode with a Navy sports medicine doc. And as I was looking for background on these memos, I think for the first one, the athletic trainer credentialing memo, if we were grading this like an academic paper and checking for plagiarism, we might find that they plagiarized heavily from the Navy. It sure looks like the Army Surgeon General copied the homework that like the Navy and Marine Corps did almost a year ago, or not almost a year ago, almost 10 years ago. Pretty close. I think it was like 8 or 9 years ago. But there was a directive coming from the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations / Marine Corps. It's 6400.2, dated January 2017, that has a lot of the exact same language about like physician oversight and reporting and credentialed but not privileged, yada, yada, yada. So Navy homies, you guys are way ahead of it.
Well, they say, and I thought this was Oscar Wilde. Apparently, I am mistaken. It is Charles Caleb. But imitation is the sincerest form of what?
Flattery.
Flattery. So perhaps the Army is flattering the Navy,
Maybe.
or just stealing. Who knows?
It's the DoD. We plagiarize off each other all the time, so it's fine.
Same team.
Yeah. And there were also some interesting references on the memo. One of the references is just a link to the NATA's homepage. Another one of the references is just a link to the homepage for the Board of Certification for ATs. Like these aren't even like policies or memos or anything. It's just like a link to their homepage. Like, thanks, NATA.
I love that. It's such a college
I'm sure
move.
there's been a lot of collaboration going on. Having been over in LinkedIn, I've seen a lot of posts about like ATs questioning the value of NATA, picking fights, wondering what NATA should be doing for them.
Don't we have an NATA guy on the bench?
Yeah, we do need to do an NATA episode.
We need to chat.
We have and credit to them, like they have offered to come on. We just haven't scheduled anything yet. And sorry, this one was a pretty short notice one, or we would have had them here. Full disclosure, we're kind of doing this episode because I don't have time to record this week. Thanks, Drew.
Where are you going again?
This time we'll be in Boston. Yeah.
Too many friends getting married.
So many weddings. But man. The weird thing about like linking to the NATA homepage, and particularly linking to the Board of Certification page that has like stuff on all the different state regulations, is that AT policies vary widely between the states. And ATs are not alone in this. Lots of medical professions have very different scope of practice limitations or allowances in different states. Some states are more restrictive, some states are less. I've been educating myself on this a little bit, and it seems like Texas and California are the biggest outliers. But the Army also has ATs practicing outside of the country, right? Because we have OCONUS H2F teams and things like that now too.
Oh, that's a good point.
So as I understand it, like state acts don't apply when you're on the installation, but you do have to have a license from a state to practice on any installation. I might not have that perfectly true. Right. I am not a lawyer or an AT, but there is some weirdness there of like you can have a license from a different state and be practicing somewhere else if you're in the federal system.
And yes, I do think that is true. I also think we're going to have some ATs blowing us up on Discord after this
probably
comes out. One thing that was of interest to me, because I didn't actually pick up on this when I first read this memo, but the applicability bullet there, number 4, and you highlighted this in the notes, but this policy, and I'm quoting, this policy applies to all certified athletic trainers working for the Department of the Army within the Army Holistic Health and Fitness System, which the implication there is that this does not apply to ATs who are not working in the H2F system, and there are many. So, I mean, I think about like the SOCOM side of the house. Would you include like the CIMT?
I'm not sure how many of the CIMT, not even CIMT, how many of the initial entry training athletic trainers have been absorbed by H2F at this point, because H2F has expanded to a lot of the initial entry training locations. But there were athletic trainers in those settings before H2F got there, yes.
I guess what I'm wondering about this is this some sort of foresight that all of Army human performance will be considered holistic health and fitness, or are they truly just like slicing off this group?
Don't know.
We don't know. We can only speculate.
My takeaway from that bullet was a little bit different.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, if I were like Medcom's lawyer or H2F's lawyer or something like that, I might have some questions, because technically and legally speaking, 0 athletic trainers work for the Department of the Army. That's just not how contracting works. The Army contracts with a company that provides us athletic training as a service. the athletic trainers work for that company.
And they are very, very aggressive, they being the contracting folks, about delineating that. They do not work for you, they work with you. So I'm wondering if they changed that word for to with, if that covers it or not. I don't know. Not a lawyer.
Maybe.
But that is an interesting point. So we may have just frustrated some people by pointing that out. Whoops. Some quotes. Do you want to hit some of these quotes?
Yeah, quotes from the memo, important stuff. First one, and this is nothing new. Like, this is how it theoretically always should have been. It's how it is in the civilian setting, but athletic trainers will practice under the clinical oversight of a physician to provide oversight and compliance with the ATC's licensing requirements.
Standard.
I think it's worth noting, practice under the clinical oversight of a physician in some people's minds might mean there's like a physician over your shoulder. It often does not mean that. There are, in fact, out there in the world, outside of military bases, athletic trainers who have like their own practices that they run independently. They just have to have some sort of agreement on the books with an overseeing physician who likely doesn't see them very often at all and is just there as kind of a legal fallback mechanism to make sure they're staying within their scope.
Yep. No real comments to add there.
Okay. Next one. Medcom Quality Management Division will serve as the command proponent for clinical quality management for the H2F system. This line might be the one where like people have the biggest thoughts about the relationship between human performance programs and like the medical side of the military.
Team, this episode of Mops and Mo's is brought to you by Train Heroic. Train Heroic is a reliable, well-designed platform for programming, tracking, and communicating with athletes. If you've been with us for any length of time, you will know that Train Heroic is the platform that we use to power our own training, long and strong, which you can find at our website, mopsandmos.com. If you're looking for a solid platform to support your own coaching, whether it's your full-time role or a side hustle, Train Heroic is definitely worth checking out. You can use the link in any of our show notes, you can find it in our newsletter, or you can head to our website, mopsandmos.com/training to get your first week for free.
I'm actually going to punt on this and say we will discuss it when we get to the next memo, because this one applies to a lot more people than just athletic trainers. This one applies to all medical professionals within the system.
This next one is very interesting to me. I actually echo John's thoughts.
We should explain what he means by echo John's thoughts. Although John cannot be with us here in person, he is with us in spirit and provided some notes and comments before we hit record.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say what it is? Or am I saying?
I was, you kind of had had some momentum there. MTF, which is Medical Treatment Facility, MTF commanders through the installation Senior Medical Council will ensure physician supervisors, which we just talked about, are designated in writing for each athletic trainer. And the part that's interesting is that I'm assuming this is some sort of guidance to review 10% of those charts monthly. So if I'm a physician and I'm basically overseeing all of these athletic trainers, I have to review 10% of their charts. And that's an actual like process. That's not just casting a glance at people's notes. That's like a formal thing. And John's point was that this is a big ask and that this is more work than the civilian sector where physicians, and I'm quoting from John, where physicians provide oversight and not typically chart reviews. So this is probably that area where you and I are very unfamiliar with the nitty gritty, but effectively, if you zoom out, you're asking a physician who is busy doing physician things to spend quite a bit of time reviewing these charts for these athletic trainers, which presumably they aren't actually interacting with. It's not like this is somebody who works down the hall from them. Oftentimes, these folks, I shouldn't say oftentimes, I should say all the time, these folks are scattered throughout the installation. So sometimes there's a good relationship there. Sometimes when you're on a bigger, larger, busier installation, it's less good, although that sounds bad. It's not less good in a bad way. It's just, you got a lot going on. So curious that one. And I'm also curious.
This does get to the overarching tension of like human performance folks do not want medical folks running human performance programs, but human performance teams involve medical professionals who need to fall under medical policies. And so, like, if somebody requires physician oversight and physician oversight includes a charting review, now H2F is demanding labor from medical assets that don't belong to H2F. You can understand why there's this back and forth conversation of who controls what authorities to oversee these professionals.
Well, and who's looking over the physician's shoulder to make sure that they're doing.
Who watches the watchers?
Right. I mean, you're adding several layers of like, did you do the thing that you're supposed to do? Well, did you do the thing that you're supposed to tell me to do? The thing that you're like, it's interesting. I do think that this is probably a separate talk for a separate conversation, but like, there's probably a world where there is a better collaboration between a lot of these medical systems and the embedded teams. It's a touchy subject in some areas, but I've seen it go well, and then I've also seen the negative consequences of when it's not gone well. So there's a cat in the background of your
Vale's making a cameo appearance in the podcast.
Vale is a large cat.
Vale is on a weight loss journey, first of all. She's doing great. She's getting much more athletic.
ABCP?
CBCP, cat body composition program?
Yeah, sure. So that's a large cat. Anyway.
Careful what you say about her.
That's fair. Document every encounter involving the screening, observation, treatment, or care of a medical condition in the emergency health record. Aren't they doing that?
I think they're supposed to be doing that. I think a lot of this is just like closing up some loopholes and making sure we're taking care of soldiers and stuff. And
sure,
the question often comes up is if I go see a human performance person instead of going to the clinic, is it going to end up in my record? Because I want to make sure it gets documented. I do think there is like a tough conversation about like what interactions rise to the level of requiring documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'll put ATs aside for a second, but like if I'm wandering through H2F and I see the dietitian and I ask, what should I have for lunch today? That is probably not a documentable medical nutrition therapy.
Which is interesting because I think across all specialties, those types of interactions are the most common and by extension, the biggest example of the value of this type of program. But it's not one that these systems, these medical systems are designed to capture efficiently, because what that would ask of you is that you basically chart the same way you do when you see a patient like one-on-one in an appointment setting. And that's just not feasible if you're out there amongst the people, which is kind of a friction point with some of the strength and conditioning services, because that is a profession that does not traditionally map well to this type of medical encounter setup. And so anytime conversation comes up about justifying strength and conditioning, blah, 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 well, a lot of the goodness in that role is in those informal, organic conversations. But then it's like, okay, how do you capture that? What does that look like? And I've literally seen it done where coaches walk around with a tablet and it becomes a very mechanical inhuman or non-human interaction. Like, cause I got to document this conversation, but just a curious thing.
Yeah. I don't think we're gonna be able to answer on this podcast what rises to the level of deserving documentation and what's just a conversation.
Again, blast us on Discord.
Yeah. Next up on the quotes, notes in which the athletic trainer requests imaging, medications, custom medical equipment, or referral to another provider must be co-signed by a privileged provider. So I think that there's a few layers there. One, ATs can certainly request those things for you, but it's going to have to go through somebody else. I think it's also implied there that those requests do not necessarily have to go to the supervising physician we mentioned earlier. They could just go to the physical therapist that is co-located with them on the team, because physical therapists are privileged providers.
Can profile up to 7 days, extendable one time. Anything longer has to be referred. I think that's already pretty standard practice.
Yeah, and this tracks with state practice acts for athletic trainers. Some are more prescriptive, actually. I was looking at a couple of states. I forget if it was like Connecticut or Delaware or something. But there was something about like athletic trainers who are practicing under a physician can manage somebody for up to 4 days. Athletic trainers who are not practicing under a physician have to refer immediately. Athletic trainers who are covering a sport can only address injuries that happened on the field of play of that sport. They can't address anything else. So like lots of restrictions like this exist at various levels for various liability reasons and things like that. But given that athletic trainers specialize in acute care, this one kind of makes sense. They can give you a profile. They cannot give you a permanent profile or even a really long temporary profile.
Now, is this next section? This is not a quote. This is your thought.
Yeah, this was a thought I had started to have that John helped me understand a little bit better.
Very prevalent thought in this world.
Yeah, it's a complaint we've heard many times over the last several years with athletic trainers, and Drew mentioned it at the top of the episode. Actually, of in the eyes of DHA in Genesis, athletic trainers don't exist. There is no profile saying athletic trainer where it has the right privileges and the right co-signing requirements and the right notes formats and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think it varies location to location, but I think typically ATs are getting lumped in with like ambulatory care nurses. But as we start to establish distinct requirements and policies for them, we really need to have an actual role specific to what they can do, what they can't do, what they're required to do, all of that.
And for somebody, I mean, this is coming from somebody who does not, I'm not a provider that uses Genesis, but the understanding here is that because ATs are kind of shoehorned into this ambulatory LPN role, the workflow in Genesis and the continuity from the physical therapies workflow is just clunky and doesn't make sense. Whereas if you do create this athletic trainer flow, so to speak, it provides for a much more seamless, user experience, patient experience, continuity of care, because the AT is a rehabilitory role. It's not a LPN, it's not a nurse. But again, massive caveat to everything I just said. I don't work in Genesis. So if something I said there made no sense or I was totally off the mark, let me know.
Well, you make a fantastic point that is very relevant to the transition from this memo to the next one.
Thank you.
Which is that often some H2F program directors are medical providers or at least have a background as a medical provider, but certainly not all of them, and I don't even think it's a majority of them, come from a medical provider background.
Most of us just stayed at a Holiday Inn last night.
Exactly. And that creates some challenges for supervision of medical professionals who need some degree of supervision from other medical professionals who are familiar with these kinds of issues, which brings us to that second memo, which is all about clinical quality management.
Subject: U.S. Army Medical Command responsibility for clinical quality management of holistic health and fitness program.
So right off the top of this memo, it directs MedCom's Quality Management Division, QMD, to assume responsibility for credentialing of athletic trainers upon the effective date of option year 4 of the H2F contract. So that's when they have to assume responsibility for athletic trainers. And then for all remaining CQM activities, which I read to mean oversight of the other medical providers on the team. That's my understanding of it. I could be wrong. That has to be complete 60 days after either publication of DOTI 6025.13, change 2. That's the clinical quality assurance program for the whole DoD, but change 2 has not been published yet, or implementation of enterprise-wide privileging in the MHS, whichever is later.
That's an interesting thing to do there, whichever is last.
I mean, it implies that some like significant changes to the DoD that have ramifications for privileging tools in Genesis are underway, just not out yet. But that is like way deep in the medical administration weeds, and we are out of our depth.
Yes, that is not our thing. Do you want me to rattle off these functions?
Sure, I might stop you and provide notes on a few, or I'll wait till you rattle off the functions and then I'll provide notes on a few. How about that?
Okay. So specifically, we are referring to the following functions, of which there are 6. Number 1, credentialing the necessary privileging of all healthcare providers in H2F. Number 2, maintenance of a patient safety program, including incident reporting and analysis. Number 3, performance of healthcare risk management activities as required. Number 4, accreditation of facilities providing operational healthcare. That one's going to be interesting. Number 5, measurement and management of clinical performance measures to assess the success of CQM efforts. And number 6, implementation and oversight of a clinical quality improvement program. The floor is yours.
Okay. I think 3 of those will deep dive. First one, credentialing and necessary privileging of all healthcare providers in H2F. As I interpret this, so healthcare providers already had to get credentialed to provide care. For our PTs, OTs, RDs, my understanding is that credentialing was happening through the local medical treatment facility. Anybody who's worked in this space knows that sometimes that process is not as fast as it could be. Sometimes you hire a person and then they are not allowed to do their job for weeks or even months as they navigate the credentialing process.
Just really quickly on that, you may know this better than me, but as I understand it, even if you were working at a different installation and you were credentialed.
Correct.
If you take a job at another installation, you have to start all over again.
So I have some personal experience with this. I hired a medical provider in my day job who was working at a different DoD installation and was credentialed at that location. They PCS'd over, came to my location, and I had already communicated with the credentialing people months ahead of the hiring, making sure they already knew who he was, had all the stuff in the system ready to go, had confirmed that he was eligible, met all the requirements, things were going to be easy, no big deal. Months go by, he moves, it's an OCONUS to CONUS thing, arrives, gets to work, I reach out, hey, did all that credentialing stuff go through? Is he good to go? And the same person who I had extensive email chains with said, I don't know who you're talking about or what this is. No.
New phone. Who's this? Wow.
Thankfully, I was able to just forward her all of the email traffic and be like,
dude,
hey,
that's
listen.
the best. When you can drop the, as per my previous email, which you were on. That always feels good.
Yeah.
It's the little thing,
It is.
Sorry.
I wonder if we totaled up across all of DoD medical, the number of days, man days of medical provider time that we pay them for and then tell them they're not allowed to provide medical care
the most
as we wait for administrative processes.
Can someone better equipped than us answer the question of what that process entails? Do you know?
Well, so I don't know, but what I will say is from my reading of this, and it's not explicitly clear in the memo, so it's a little bit hard to tell, but there's an implication that H2F credentialing specifically might be getting centralized away from those local MTFs.
Which could be good.
Which might help speed things up because a lot of local MTFs get confused about what H2F is and who these people are and why they're not in the clinic and yada, yada, yada.
Yes.
Change is hard. Maybe we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, John's comment was that if you don't make the credentialing faster, I think this might answer your question. It's basically 2 months of getting paid to not treat patients, which tracks with what I've seen, which is absurd.
And I think we've already heard reports of athletic trainers who've been in place suddenly not being able to treat because they don't meet these requirements. To be fair, that was probably a massive loophole or gray area that needed to get closed because that means we have medical providers providing care without credentialing.
Which makes
that was
you
probably
wonder.
needed to be fixed.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
That brings us to the next one. This is one I have a little bit of personal scar tissue from. I've also bounced around. You guys know I've had some weird jobs in my time, and some of them involved visiting basically every location that's doing H2F. And so Drew mentioned the bullet already, but accreditation of facilities providing operational healthcare. And I think the big question looming is, are H2F facilities, or at least the medical portions of H2F facilities, inspectable by the Joint Commission? For our non-medical folks, that's probably meaningless. They have no idea what I'm talking about when I say TJC. But medical folks will understand that that's a fairly big requirement to levy on these locations. And I'll tell you, almost every time I visit a place where athletic trainers and PTs are doing treatment around H2F, I ask them that, like, are you TJC inspectable? Have you been inspected? Did you have to do the gap analysis stuff? Whatever.
Absolutely not.
The answer typically has been no. Also, I don't know what you're talking about.
They're basically running speakeasies.
To some degree. As I understand the literal policy, it's entirely up to the local MTF what sites get put on the inspection list. So it's basically like a risk tolerance decision by the MTF commander whether they want those locations to be inspected. And where all the heartburn seems to come from, it's always dry needling. That's the one they care about because it's the intervention that breaks the skin.
Blood.
Yeah. So that's where they get to they get real freaky about infection control stuff, environmental care, life safety stuff, where the nearest sink is, how wide the doorways are for gurneys, yada, yada, yada.
Which, here's a question that just came to mind because working in a medical brigade, you have a lot of, medics presumably playing around with IVs and these sorts of things. That's not an accredited facility, is it?
You talking like unit clinics?
Just like the unit?
I believe they are.
Poking each other?
Yeah, like the aid station, I think is. I had to go through some kind of gap analysis.
Well, so here's, and I'll quote John here. Hopefully he doesn't mind. If the JTC needs to start coming to H2F facilities, this will be, and I imagine him shaking his finger in sort of a 19th century politician type way, this will be absurdity of the highest level. Love the phrasing there. And this one, so having done this now for like 10 plus years, you always hear this, like, should these human performance areas be clinics? Should they be inspectable? Should, blah, 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 blah. And I think on the surface, you could see the argument for that because you would expect that you would be maintaining the same types of standards that any medical facility would maintain. But I think it's interesting, especially in the H2F case, because for years, well, when this first started, so much was promised in terms of facilities and resources and accoutrement. So little of that was actually delivered. And that's not a knock on anybody. It's just, I think, a realization of what it truly takes to build, for example, a brick and mortar facility, or to have, the right kind of flooring or medical drops for your computers or whatever. And for a long time, that kind of make do attitude has been championed. Like, oh, look what we've been able to accomplish. Look what these H2F teams have been able to do with so little. Like, look at the impact they're having. To rise to the level of like a true, as I understand it at least, to rise to the level of a true medical clinic requires like a massive overhaul in the infrastructure of where you're operating, almost taking you back to square one, which was to say, hey, we'll build brick and mortar H2F facilities. Because you're talking about little things you might not think about, like what is, like the flooring, like I mentioned, having access to a sink, handrails. That was one that I dealt with in the Air Force. You have handrails. So I don't know what is required to meet that standard on the Army side of things. I'm sure somebody out there does, but I can tell you that the majority of these H2F facilities, and I hope we're not throwing anybody under the bus, the majority of these facilities don't have those things. So that will be an interesting one. I could see goodness. I could see that as a forcing function to like provide a certain level of support. I could also see that going quite poorly. So who knows? TBD.
I have two thoughts on this one. Having bounced around the DoD outside the Army a little bit, I can tell you that across the DoD, they're starting to better understand and craft reasonable policy for these embedded care models.
That's probably the move.
And I think there's different names in different places. H2F seems to be the term the Army's using. They're just saying that like all embedded care is H2F functionally. Air Force likes to call it integrated operational support. I can't remember the Navy term that was in their old OpNav instruction thing, but we're starting to like wrap our heads around what this is and what helps it and what gets in the way, getting a little bit better, I think. And I think it's a balance of making sure we have policies that control liability issues and make sure people are staying on the rails without getting in their way so much that they can't do anything. Flip side of it, I think different services have different tolerance levels for like doing medical things in non-medical facilities. And what I always go back to, there are medics doing IVs in the barracks.
That's what I was saying.
I did my first IV like within the first week of basic training. We were just sticking each other. We were not trained medical anything. We were just sweaty
exactly
kids
my question.
Stabbing each other. Like arguably the one that I always come back to is the example of like, why are you freaking out about this when we're doing other things? The Army has a walking blood bank program, meaning like a pre-screened pool of donors that we can just like move blood between if there's a mass casualty situation where like a medic will come and be like, hey, that guy over there got injured. You're on the walking blood bank list. You're a match. I'm going to take your blood and put it directly into him.
You just plug them in together.
If we can do that, we probably don't need to freak out about like where a physical therapist's treatment table is and whether the bathroom has a pull thing to make sure somebody can come get you if you pass out in the bathroom.
Amen. Peacetime Army, baby. Here we go. Let's come up with some stuff. Yeah. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that one?
I think that's it for that one. I'm sure we'll be hearing from medical people in the Discord telling us how dumb we are and how wrong we have it.
At the highest level. Yeah, please do. Because, we're nothing if not quick to correct ourselves.
Yeah. So the next one is, and this is probably the one that has like inspired the most fear of medical leadership asserting themselves in human performance spaces. But the exact wording is measurement and management of clinical performance measures to assess the success of CQM efforts. And that's not terribly clear language. What I am hoping it means is just like monitoring for and ensuring training is out there to avoid adverse incidents. Things where
I read that.
Like things go wrong. But I would love to hear like the official, and I could probably find this is probably homework I should have done before we hit record, but the official Army Medical Command definition of clinical performance measures. Because if we're talking about like measures of performance and measures of effectiveness stuff, that implies like DHA productivity metrics, which is the last thing we want in human performance settings.
Like certain number of patients a day kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I hope that this type of thing has some built-in like iterative analysis function so that we can try, see what works, adjust, versus whole-scale implementation of this and bring a lot of these embedded performance programs to just a grinding halt and then waiting to see if policy gets changed. So who knows? Hopefully if people out there listen to this and have some ability to dictate these things, we can do a slow roll. Because I think the same thing. If you implement DHA type metrics in some of these settings, it's going to be squirrely.
As we move towards a close here, one kind of thought that struck me after I read all this, SOCOM's been doing all this stuff for years. Like, why is it just now that we need all this policy and we're freaking out about it and it's a problem? Like, how come SOCOM gets away with not dealing with any of this?
Because people need things to do. And there's more people needing more things to do on the conventional side than on the SOCOM side. So we do things, and this is one of the things that we are doing.
Okay. I think I get it that there's like an element of scale here.
Sure.
And then SOCOM, of course, has the magical powers of personal services contracts
which we've been clamoring for ages is the answer. But yet here we are with 2 memos. Why don't they just do that? Is there somebody we can talk to that can just tell us why they don't just do that?
I mean, it's probably like members of Congress that we need to be lobbying. I don't know if we have like a Mops and Mo's lobbyist yet. But
we're going to be in DC in a few weeks.
Hey, well,
we could lobby.
Unofficial announcement there. Hold on, we won't discuss that too much yet.
We won't tell you why. Yeah, we're not going to tell you why. But
don't worry about that.
Lobby. We'll see. Let's stand outside with signs.
Hey,
personal services contracts.
But and I'll state 2 very direct requests to the audience here because I don't know who's in the audience. Request number 1, as I understand it, there are only 2 blanket exemptions that allow personal services contracts. SOCOM can do it, and medical can do it. and H2F doesn't count as medical. Drew might need an athletic trainer after hurting himself there.
Just hit my backdrop with my elbow.
But like SOCOM has one, like special operations can do personal services contracts, blanket approval. Medical can do it, blanket approval. H2F, although it involves medical folks, not medical. Go ahead.
Do these memos not skew H2F more towards a medical entity?
It depends on how you read that. I think they clarify the support requirements from medical to H2F.
If by closing loopholes, have we not opened another loophole that might make the case for a personal services contract of athletic trainers?
Maybe, but that is up to a lot of other people. But what I am suggesting here is not just a personal services contract for athletic trainers, because those are medical professionals, even if they're not operating in a traditional medical setting. I'm talking about like strength and conditioning coaches being on a personal services contract.
Yes, please.
And I'd
we
be
should
very
have a
curious
conversation
about how that works and who would have to approve that.
All right, I'm putting this here as a bookmark just to gauge interest from folks based on responses or non-responses, but a conversation with somebody about the feasibility of strength coaches being involved in the medical system, not in like a hospital setting, but more professionally involved in the kind of like return to care spectrum. I think that there's a lot of goodness there.
Let's do that. I said it was going to be 2 requests. It's going to be 3 now because we're adding this number 2 request. Who's the right person to talk to about the whole gym clinic model? I know a few people doing it. We've worked closely with a few people. We have a few people on our list of potential guests. But if you know somebody who's like the person for gym clinic, I think that's a worthwhile conversation.
There has to be, somebody is leading the charge in that industry. So bookmark number 1. What was number 2?
That was number 2. Number 1 was understanding the personal services contract exemption thing.
Yes,
and who would authorize that.
And then number 3 was...
Final one, if you are a DHA person or a MedCom person listening to this and you feel like the medical community's voice is not well represented enough in this human performance biased conversation and you want to provide us insight into the perspective from that direction, let us know. Contact form on the website.
Reach out. We will put rule number 1 to rest for that type of example.
Yeah. We have requested a volunteer, so you're welcome to volunteer. No guarantees that we'll have you on because I will background check you when you offer, but
it's like vampires. Vampires can't come inside unless they've been invited. And we have extended the invite.
Yeah. You can't violate rule number 1 unless you've been invited.
To the medical vampires out there. No offense. Sucking blood. Closing thoughts? Anything?
I think the big one, and I've heard this from a couple people, very scared that this is like the foot in the door of MedCom taking over H2F. I don't necessarily see that here. What I see is we had some like huge gaps in policy that needed to get addressed and required MedCom support to be addressed. And so maybe I'm being naive here, but it seems like these are pretty reasonable, well-intentioned partnerships between H2F and the medical side of the Army.
And I think as a closing comment for me to all my embedded leaders out there, just sit tight, just see what happens. Don't read this kind of thing and blow up the group chats and go creating issues and sending emails. Just, chill.
That would never happen.
Bless their hearts. Rest assured, if something big is on the horizon, you'll hear it here first at Mops and Mo's. So with that, we'll let you get out, go to dinner. Team, thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.